Hi everybody, welcome back. Glad you could tune in again. I want to talk today about one feature of the book of Psalms that causes more anxiety and uncertainty than any other. Many Christians find this aspect of the Psalms deeply shocking. Indeed, for some, it's sufficient reason for them not to want to pray those Psalms or those parts of the Psalms at all. For some people, this aspect of the Psalms I want to talk about this morning is sufficient reason to remove them from the Christian hymn book. I'm talking about the so-called Psalms of imprecation, the imprecatory Psalms, the Psalms of cursing as they're sometimes called. There are some Psalms which contain within them prayers that God would act in judgment against his people's enemies and against his enemies. And the first such psalm is Psalm 5, which I want to share a few thoughts with you about today. And I hope I'm able to say a word or two which will help you to see why the Psalms, and the Psalms of imprecation in particular, and the sentiments contained within them, do indeed find a valuable place in Christian piety. Just a word or two about this psalm before I make those comments about it. It's a psalm of David, begins with David crying out to God in his anguish and groaning to him, verse 1, asking God to hear his voice, verse 2. And in verses 4 to 6, you get quite a clear identification of what the problem is. David identifies the source of his anxiety as evil men, the boastful, evildoers, those who speak lies, bloodthirsty and deceitful men. And it's clear to David that the Lord abhors these evil men too. They're God's enemies as well as his. And then as the psalm unfolds, you get to verse 10, which is where the imprecation comes, in which David prays, quote, "Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Because of the abundance of their transgressions, cast them out, for they've rebelled against you." That's actually quite a mild imprecation by the standards of some later psalms, but since this is the first one we've encountered as we've been working through the psalms, I wanted to say a word or two about it here. And I want to tell you a story, a true story, which illustrates something of the value of imprecations in the Christian life. In 1985, a man by the name of Saparmurat Niyazov became president of Turkmenistan. In 1999, 14 years later, he was made president for life by a passive and acquiescent parliament that he basically had under his thumb. So he was more or less a dictator. And over the following years, he did a whole bunch of arbitrary and whimsical and capricious things, the usual kind of grandiose posturing of tin pot dictators. He had statues built in his honor. He named months of the year after himself. Arbitrary and ridiculous regulations appeared. Car radios were banned. Young men were banned from wearing beards. More ominously, the free press was abolished. His political opponents were, well, let's just say they mysteriously disappeared. And at one point he said that he wanted to strangle the church. There were very few Christians in Turkmenistan, but that was too many for President Niyazov. Christians frequently just disappeared from their homes. They were imprisoned and tortured, put to death, forced to renounce their faith. And so it continued for over 20 years. On Wednesday, the 20th of December 2006, the Operation World prayer diary featured Turkmenistan. Operation World, the prayer diary, used to be a big fat book this thick, which contained information about lots of different countries in the world and invited and encouraged Christians to pray sort of a country a day through the different countries of the world. And on the 20th of December 2006, it was the turn of Turkmenistan. So doubtless across the world there were thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands maybe, of Christians praying for their brothers and sisters in Turkmenistan. Well, among those Christians who used Operation World Prayer Diary were some close family friends of mine. And one of the family who I spoke to after it recalls that his daughter prayed on the evening of Wednesday, the 20th of December 2006, about 7 o'clock in the evening, I think, in their family worship, prayed that President Niyazov would die one way or the other. That is, either by becoming a Christian, dying to his sin, or by being removed from office, dying in relation to the power that he had over his people, or by ceasing to breathe. At 10 minutes past 8 London time that same evening, President Niazov had a heart attack and died. And that helpfully illustrates a number of things about imprecations and the sentiments contained within them that we might do well to reflect on, and many of which are obvious to you, I'm sure. It seems that God answers such prayers, for example. And it's also helpful to note, I think, that God answers such prayers in his time. See, if it were left to us, we might not find it so easy to determine when exactly was the right time for God to raise his hand in judgment against a wicked ruler, even one so wicked as President Niazov. God apparently tolerates evil often for a long period of time, and we dare not charge God with injustice. But yet, in praying the imprecatory psalms, we are confessing our faith in the justice and wisdom of God. We are therefore relieved from that terrible and onerous burden, the unbearable responsibility of being the ones to decide when judgment should be meted out. Would you want to decide that? I wouldn't want to decide the day and the hour at which the wrath of God had reached its full measure. But the Lord, in his wisdom and in his justice, knows. And so when we pray the imprecatory psalms, we are emphatically not taking into our own hands the tools of justice. We are asking God to take them into his and entrusting judgment to him, to whom it belongs. God bless you this day, and I look forward, Lord willing, to seeing you soon. Bye for now.